So here's all the strips cut and planed down to the appropriate thickness. Now obviously the length is still long, but we will trim that up after the entire thing is glued together. And after triple checking to make sure I had the right piece in the right spot, I drew a triangle on there. And just in case you guys don't know, we use triangles basically because a triangle will only go back one way. So once we have that marked, we know if a piece is out of line because the triangle will not match. So next step, gluing it together. So we're just about ready to go, but before we do, we want to make sure we have everything ready to go. So I've already got the clamps spread to the right width so that when the glue is put on, all we got to do is tighten them down. I've got the brush ready to go, we've got glue sitting there, and we've got more clamps there so that we can pull the entire assembly together and get it nice and tight. As for glue, of course, I'm using Titebond 2, which is my preferred glue. And as we all know, it is FDA approved for indirect food contact, in other words, cutting boards. So let's get some glue spread and let's get this thing clamped up. Welcome back. So it's a new day. We've got the clamps off and the board is now dry, of course. So the next step is to run it through the planer, get it cleaned up, and of course we're going to run both sides through and get it nice and flat and prepare it for the next step. Well, here it is out of the planer. And this is actually usually my favorite part of the project, even though we're only halfway done. There's something very satisfying, almost magical, I think, about seeing either a rough board or a glued up lamination like this that's covered in glue, you know, all beat up, and then you run it through the planer and it comes out nice and smooth, and you finally get to see the color and the character of this wood. So the next step is to start cross-cutting it. And if you have a sliding compound miter that has a long enough cross-cut, you could use that. But for me, I prefer the table saw. Now, one other quick note about the planer. Planers have a tendency to cause snipe. And what that is on the leading edge or the trailing edge, sometimes the blade takes just a very slight cut, deeper than the rest of the surface. Now, most of the time this is not a problem, but when you are then trying to glue that piece to another piece, that little bit of a fraction of an inch will show up as a crack. So, in order to remedy that, what you have to do is look at your planer. Some have in-feed and out-feed tables that are adjustable, meaning you can either tilt them up, down, whichever way to get it as flat as possible. Sometimes, even with them perfectly flat, it's still going to do it. And this board is relatively short, but if you were doing, say, a 4-foot or longer board and your in-feed table is only a foot long, there's a lot of weight cantilevered out. And so it just has the natural tendency to want to get into the blade, you know, until it gets more onto the planer and is supported. So if that's the case, then you might have to set up rollers on the beginning and the outfeed side of the planer. Now, if you just cannot get the snipe to come out, and no matter what you do, it just won't work, then the only other option that you might have, other than trying to sand it out, which is a tricky proposition because we want to keep this as flat as possible. So your other option might just have to be to make it a little bit longer and cut off the bad part on the beginning and the end. A little bit of waste, but you know, you can then save those pieces and you can always use them for something. At least I can. So let's start cross-cutting. So at this stage, all I want to do is clean up this rough edge. Now you could take it again over to the miter box and make a cross-cut. I like the table saw better. I just feel it's a little more accurate. So what I'm going to do is use this simple little cross-cutting sled that I built, and it just has a runner that rides in the miter track, of course, and it's got a fence at 90 degrees. Just simply rides in the slot and makes our cut. Now you could use the miter gauge that comes with your saw. I don't particularly prefer them. A lot of times they have a lot of slop in them, and of course some of them do have adjustments to take that out. But even so, you're dealing with a very narrow fence here, and with a board of this size, and especially this width, it's a little unwieldy and hard to control. Another good thing about the sled is that essentially there's no friction between the wood and the blade. If we were running this on the miter gauge, the wood is resting against the table, which causes friction, and it wants to rock a little bit. Here, it's on a carriage, and the entire thing moves, and this is very rigid. So it's a much safer option as well, and again, I think it's a much cleaner result. So now that both ends of our cutting board have been cut square, we could just do a little bit of sanding, put a finish on it, and start using it as it is. But at this stage, it's not going to be quite as durable as an end grain cutting board. And to understand why, we have to think about the way wood is made. And to use the paintbrush analogy, wood is made from long fibers, okay, running this way. So if we were to take a knife and start cutting on these fibers, it's not going to be long before the fibers break loose and we have gouges taken out of our board. It doesn't look good. It's also a good place for bacteria and germs to hide. So if we were to take that grain, turn it edgeways, now when we take our knife, it slices through it. It's much easier on the knife and it's much easier on the cutting board. So as long as we sand it to a fairly high grade and put a good finish on it, it should keep all the bacteria out and last for many years to come. Okay, we're finally ready to start cross-cutting our pieces. Now, I'm using the sled to do this, and you may be wondering why not just move the fence over and start making your cuts. Well, this piece is too long for that, and we're only cutting 7/8 of an inch, so we have very little between the blade and the fence, and this piece gets very unwieldy when you're trying to push it through. So what I'm going to do is use the sled. Now, that takes a little bit of setup. Let me walk you through it. So the first thing we need to do is have something to basically be our stop block, and that's right here. Now, it's very important that when you are referencing your stop block and making your cut, that you are past the stop block before you contact the blade, otherwise you'll get bind up and kick back. So, with that taken care of, the next issue is that when the piece cuts off, we don't want it just to fall down to the table. Again, there's a chance of kickback and it coming back at us. So what I did was just cut a very simple wedge, and I've got it double stick taped down to the zero clearance insert. So the idea is, once we make our cut, the piece will simply fall off. We can safely get it out of the way, make another cut. What we're going to do is we are going to cut this piece down and continue cutting it down until we get down to about the last 6-8 inches. From that point, it will be too dangerous to use this setup because the piece will essentially be taller than it is wide. So at that point, we will take all this apart. We will then move the fence over, make sure we're at the same 7/8 distance here, and then make the rest using a push stick and pushing it through. Now, it is a bit of a pain to wait on the blade to stop, but after about 2 pieces, you're going to start piling up pieces and you're going to run into the same problem with kickback. So after a couple of pieces, let the saw stop, move them out of the way, and continue cutting. It takes a little bit of time, but at this point, you wouldn't want to start over.